Hi, my name is Phan, Alonzo and Virginia Decker Professor at Johns Hopkins University, and I'm a co-editor at the Academy of Management Perspectives. Authors still continue to have some confusion over the kinds of articles that we accept for publication at AMP. So the purpose of this small presentation is to help inform potential authors how should one structure an appropriate publication for an AMP submission. First of all, AMP publishes authoritative expositions of a scholarly issue. Typically, these issues are those that have perhaps lain dormant in the literature, have not received the kind of airing that the author believes should be received. These are not comprehensive literature reviews, nor is it a theory building type of a paper. Neither do we publish single study empirical papers. So instead, what we try to publish are expositions. These are essays, discussions, oftentimes opinions of issues that are important to the scholarly audience who may not necessarily be experts in the area of the author's domain. We are also starting to publish expositions on research methods, but these particular expositions are not how-to type contributions that you might typically find in a research methods journal, but are discussions of how certain methodologies may or may not be helpful to answer certain kinds of questions. The contributors are likely to be experts on the question because we are really asking them for their perspective, if you will. But most importantly, they have to be problem-driven. And so a successful AMP contribution should think about why the paper is important and why have we not answered those questions well enough. So let me go through an anatomy of an AMP paper. So I'm using as an example the best paper that was recently awarded the Best Paper Prize by Krasinski and Ulrich, called Making Strategic Human Capital Relevant, a Time-Sensitive Opportunity. So if you look at the abstract, immediately it makes a point about what the paper is trying to do. It is basically re-looking at the core assumptions underlying human capital theory, and it's making an argument that we need to rethink these assumptions because it appears that the assumptions and what occurs in reality don't quite match up. On page 358, they start by highlighting an observation from the field. They basically said that when they were looking at a recent project that was completed, they realized that a lot of the analysis was focused on a part of the organization that seemed to, at the end of the day, be relatively trivial from a financial standpoint. The second thing that they highlighted is that as a result of this disconnect between the importance of the question in reality and the apparent vigor or depth with which the analysis of the question was done in a theoretical sense, that perhaps this gap was driven by a problem in the underlying assumptions that drive the theory. So this paper is really trying to close a theory-practice gap, but from a theoretical perspective, not from a practice perspective. The way they're going to approach this is very normative, meaning that they're not going to be so much focused on theory building, which is appropriate for AMP, but rather they're going to say, given this theory-practice gap, why or how should we go about closing it, or how should we go about rethinking our assumptions? So they begin by going through the assumptions. For example, one assumption in firm-specific human capital is that it is somehow important for competition or competitive performance. And what they're arguing from the rest of the exposition, that it's not clear that that's necessarily the case. It's not clear that managers really understand what firm-specific human capital really is, whether they can in fact identify it, and whether they in fact really believe that those things exist. And then they try to illustrate what they mean using cases or using examples from practice. And then they end the article by basically discussing how their exposition might change the way we view not only the theory, but the way we apply the theory, and more importantly, the way we might investigate the theory going forward. So let me conclude by saying that while I have picked this as a specific example of the kinds of papers that we might publish, so not all award-winning papers follow this structure, but there are some elements they have in common. First of all, the paper is focused, research relevant, and problem-driven. Secondly, the authors demonstrate a deep understanding of the existing literature. So it's very clear that there has to be a good, solid literature review, but it doesn't have to be comprehensive. These papers are not review papers. The authors must be able to demonstrate that they understand the strengths and weaknesses of the literature. So citing a whole bunch of papers is not sufficient. They have to say something about where, taken in total, all of these papers stand in terms of our understanding of the knowledge. The papers tend to be forward-looking, and they're forward-looking in the sense that they're still focused on, how does this conversation influence the way we research this question? Finally, these papers tend to have a writing style that is very accessible by a scholarly audience, because our focus is on the scholarly audience, but these are not necessarily experts. So try to avoid jargon. If you have to use very technical terms, make sure you explain those terms. And if you have any further questions, please email Professor Michael Wright or myself, and we would be happy to take a look at your proposals before you submit them. Thank you.